Okay, everybody, we're going to get going in just a second, so grab a seat. Come on in. I'll invite everyone to come grab a seat. Great, and for folks online, we could start the webinar if we haven't already. Okay, well, it's nice to be back in the Augusta Civic Center. For folks who don't know me, or if I haven't met you, my name is David Plum, and my role here is just to help facilitate and moderate today's conversation. We're excited to have a chance to get together like this in person and talk about climate action in Maine, talk about 2 years into the latest version of Maine Won't Wait. I'm not going to say anything more right now. I'm going to invite the co-chairs to come up and get us going in today's meeting. We'll be doing a bunch of things today. We'll be having some conversations at our tables. We'll be having some discussion amongst all of us. We have some invited guests joining us online at one point. But without further ado, let me turn it over to your co-chairs and specifically to Melanie Loisem. Melanie, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for spending some time on a lovely summer afternoon with us. We really appreciate your commitment to the work of the Maine Climate Council. So this meeting today marks an important midpoint between the publication of the 2024 update to Maine Won't Wait and the start of the planning process for the 2028 update. But as important as planning is, implementation is even more important. Conditions change, obstacles emerge, and new opportunities arise. In our last few meetings, we've been tracking how much has changed since we developed the 2024 plan. Yet Maine Won't Wait has always been grounded in doing what is best for Maine. The strategies within the plan are about economic development, energy affordability, strengthening our communities, and protecting the natural resources that support our way of life. Regardless of the challenges that we face, Maine's climate plan is full of actions that can help us meet this moment. So that's why we wanted to gather in person today. We've been very effective as a council meeting remotely, but sometimes it's really important for us to come together physically and be in a room together to have these conversations. We have the collective experience to understand what's working, what isn't, and how to adjust course to take advantage of new opportunities. Now's the time to begin thinking about how to improve on the plan that we have, considering the challenges we face today and the opportunities that lie in the future. So for the agenda today, we're going to begin by recognizing all the progress we've made. Am I the one who's supposed to do the slides? I get to do my silly thing about the giant green button that I can never figure out. Let's see, can I do it? Yes, it really is the big green button. So since the 2024 update was released, working groups have continued to meet regularly. Thank you to our co-chairs and all of our working group members for the time you've been spending doing that. We've been sharing progress, identifying challenges, and helping to keep momentum moving forward. In Climate Council meetings, we've heard updates from state agencies. We've discussed how federal policy changes are affecting our implementation. We've highlighted our local leaders who continue to chart pathways forward and focused on the affordability challenges that Maine families face today with cost of living. With all of the headwinds that we've faced these last 2 years, there is still so much we can be proud of, and we want to take a moment to celebrate our wins. From there, we're going to take stock of where we are today. We're going to provide some updates on the last legislative session and studies that will be supporting the council's work. The co-chairs from our Science and Technical Subcommittee are going to share some highlights with us from their recent interim report, and then I'll be giving you a brief update on our DEP biennial greenhouse gas report. However, most of our time today will be spent looking forward and doing really fun exercises that David's going to facilitate. So as we think about the next 2 years, where can we make the greatest difference? Where are conditions aligned for us to lean in and accelerate? Where can we lay the groundwork now so that when the landscape shifts again, we're ready to move quickly? And what priorities are so important that even in the face of strong headwinds, we need to continue pushing forward? We're excited later to have Casey Katims, the Executive Director of the U.S. Climate Alliance, join us to help kick off that conversation. Casey will be sharing how states across the country are responding to this moment and continuing to make progress despite significant challenges. After that, we'll turn to all of you. Together, we'll identify where the council can have the greatest impact over the next 2 years and where we should focus our energy and leadership. Before we begin our conversations, I do want to take a moment to welcome 2 new people to the Climate Council. I don't know if I've seen Tim wander in yet, but Tim Peabody is joining as acting commissioner of the, there he is. Thank you, Tim, for Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Now Selena knows I'm going to do it to her. And Selena Cunningham, acting commissioner of the Department of Energy Resources. Congratulations on the new agency. I also want to thank David Plum for facilitating this conversation. He always makes it more fun. And I also want to thank Hillary Landfried. Where did she go to hide? There she is. She is the woman behind it all. She does all the really hard work and deserves the credit. So thank you all for joining us today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David.
Okay, great. So we wanted to start off right away with some conversations to get us going. And I think we're going to do this at your tables. Just take 10 minutes. And I think, as Melanie mentioned, we want to start in a place of celebrating what's worked well. That's where we want to start. So your first question, again, at your tables, and if you're at a table of just like 2 people, feel free to join another table as you wish. And just take 10 minutes. And there's a temptation to always focus on the things that aren't working. We all know it, right? But in this conversation, I'd love to focus on the things that are working and you really are proud of. So let's just take 10 minutes. Folks online, hang in there for a second. We're going to take 10 minutes here at your tables. And I look forward to hearing some things that you're really proud of from the last 2 years. All right, I'll let you do it. All right, folks, let's bring it back here to the plenary. You're probably in the middle of a thought, but thanks for bringing it back to plenary. Okay, it's so fun to look around this room and see all these friendly faces of people I know. It's good to see everybody. Okay, so we're going to do 2 things to have a quick conversation about it. First, we're going to use Menti and technology. If the technology gods are with us today, this should work well. This is the time of the program where you actually pull out your phones. There's a QR code in the center of your tables. And if you are not familiar with this, what you do is you open up the the photo app on your phone. And without taking a picture, just point that photo app at the QR code and it should pop up a little link at the bottom that you click on. So Mira, my colleague, will open up the Menti and it's going to ask you a question. It's going to ask you this question. What are you feeling particularly proud of? Be interesting to see where those conversations go. And so we'll see some responses as they come in here. Folks online, I believe in the chat, there should be a link that gets thrown in there. If it's not in there now, it will be in just a second. So if you're online joining us, you can answer this as well. Just click on that link in the chat. Okay, stuff's going to start to come in. We can read it as it comes in once you're done typing. Some good stuff there. Look at that creation of mocha. There you go, Samantha. All right, a lot of good things have happened here, right? We've created some things like mocha and the Department of Energy Resources, right? We've had the Community Resilience Partnership Program is continuing to be very successful. It's very exciting. We're drawing connections between land use and climate in ways that we haven't before. We've got structures in place. We've got community engagement happening. Great. And so as we get a few more responses here, I'll ask Mira to hit the space bar and it'll do a quick sort and give us some thematic things here. We can see what's happening, but I think once we get up just a few more. That Community Resilience Partnership just keeps getting a lot of love. Programs, Michael Stoddard's running. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and see if this will work for you, Mira, and hit the space bar. And let's give this a quick second while the machine thinks. And then we are going to do a quick discussion around the room. So we have some folks with mics that can help out. Let's see what's going. Clean energy alternatives, community resilience, public engagement, adaptation funding, collaborative partnerships, infrastructure improvements, youth engagement being mentioned, nature-based solutions. Okay, great. So there's a lot to be proud of. There's a lot going on. And, Maine is out there doing its thing, trying to make this work. All right, so I bet there's some things you talked about in your tables that didn't show up particularly well in this exercise. So before we go to the next question on Menti, I just want to do a quick pause in the room. What's something else that folks talked about that you want to shout out right now? We'll bring a mic to your table of something important in the last 2 years that maybe didn't come out quite so strongly in the Menti. What else is out there, folks? What else do you talk about? Don't be shy. Let's make this a conversation. Who's got something else to share that came out in your tables? Right here. Use the mic so the folks online can hear you.
We're really proud on the Department of Education side at the advent of the Green Schools Network and program, and we exceeded the symposium amounts by a huge amount. The level of youth interest and youth leadership is really strong. Educators are getting more and more supported now through the new Green Schools Network, so we're really excited about some of the progress we're seeing there.
Fantastic. I love that. What else? What else came up that maybe didn't shout out quite so loudly in the Menti? Right here. Judy East. And folks who want to introduce themselves when they grab the mic, that'd be great.
Hi, Judy East, Resilience Working Group co-chair. It actually didn't come up in the table, but it didn't come up there either, and that's the DHHS or CDC extreme temperatures guides that they just put out and have online. It's a really excellent piece of work.
Nice. So we should check that out if you haven't seen it yet, extreme temperature guides that CDC and DHHS have come out with. Great. What else right here at this table?
What we are very proud of at Volunteer Maine is the most recent cohort, our full cohort of Maine Service Fellows that are supported by the NOAA grant. And our second cohort has just started. And then our Maine Climate Corps network. So that is a series of programs like Resilience Corps through GPCOG and Conservation Corps that are engaging in climate work that realize a lot of these Maine Won't Wait climate action goals through the power of service. And a lot of it is youth engagement and making sure that some of these folks like to stay in Maine too. So.
Amazing. Amazing. I remember when we were first talking about that, I think in the 2020 plan of creating Climate Corps and things like that. And to see it blossom like that is really spectacular. Other things that haven't been shouted out sufficiently that people want to mention? Anything else? Don't forget to introduce yourselves.
Tim Peabody from Fish and Wildlife. Our table talked about conserving land, specifically our department working with partners around the state to do some really great land acquisition over the last couple of years. Also, we discussed water quality, the efforts that Maine organizations are putting into protecting our water quality for resilience in the threat of climate change.
Important stuff, right? And I think some folks I heard mention of the permanent funding for conservation as well, which is a big change. Yeah, round of applause. Kate Dempsey's going to applaud on that. Yeah, love that. Okay, anything else that came up at your tables? Anything else that is a shout out of something we're really proud of the last couple of years in Maine Won't Wait, climate action? Anything else? Kate.
I will say something not about conservation. Kate Dempsey, the Nature Conservancy, a theme that wasn't explicitly brought up, but I heard my group speak about, reinforces to me that planning matters, because all the work we've done together over the last 8 years meant that whether it was good news or harder news, we've been able to react much more effectively and collaborate more easily.
I love that. That's the goal, right? That's the big goal. Okay. All right, so a lot to be proud of. Today we are going to be, using that as a basis of thinking of the next 2 years. We're going to do one more quick Menti before we get going in some of the presentations. So Mira, if you want to advance the Menti slides, and folks, you can jump right back into where you were in the phone or use that QR code. Folks online, click on that same link in the chat. So if you click on that link or go back into your phone, it's going to start, this is the first hint of it, right? And we'll do more as we go throughout the day here. But in one word, this is going to be a word cloud, folks. But in one word, what should be Maine's focus for climate action in the next 2 years, given the current context? Okay? One word. What's the focus? We're going to be doing a couple rounds on a similar question throughout this afternoon. So this is our first whack at it. You guys can see it okay on the screen, right? All right. So you can see emerging: resilience, implementation, affordability, funding, capacity. Yeah. Okay. Some big themes are emerging there, right? That's great. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for doing that. I think what we're going to do now is switch gears, and Sarah Curran's going to give us an update on some legislation, and then we're going to do some further updates from the Science Subcommittee. So Sarah Curran, over to you. And here's your clicker, big red button.
Big green button,
Big green
right,
button,
Melanie?
yes.
All right. Thanks, David. That was a really fun conversation at my table, thinking about the progress that we've made and the groundwork we've all laid. So that was a nice opening activity. I am really looking forward to the conversation about where we lean in next. But before we get there, we wanted to take a few minutes to share some recent updates. I'll start with a few highlights from the legislative session, and I want to also mention a couple of studies that GOPIF is undertaking to inform the future work of the Maine Climate Council. Then, as David mentioned, we'll hear from the Science and Technical Subcommittee on the great recent interim report they put out, tracking key science impacts, and also some work they're doing on sort of the science assets that inform their work. And then finally, Melanie's going to provide an update on the state's greenhouse gas inventory. So I want to start with the legislative session. It was a very busy legislative session, and there was a lot of meaningful progress on several priorities that support Maine's climate goals. So first, the legislature renewed Maine's commitment to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So as a reminder, RGGI is a cooperative program among 10 northeastern states that caps and reduces power sector carbon emissions through a market-based allowance trading system. And since the program began in 2008, participating states have reduced power sector CO2 emissions by more than 50%. The program's proceeds are reinvested in the participating states, and so Maine invests our RGGI proceeds into Efficiency Maine Trust's energy efficiency programs, generating approximately $4 of benefit for every $1 invested. And our continued participation in RGGI is important to allow Maine to keep lowering energy costs, improving public health, and supporting the clean energy transition. So I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that bill today. The Council has also recognized in the most recent plan especially how important it is that all Mainers have access to energy efficiency upgrades. And in the 2025 legislative session, LD 1967 directed formerly the Governor's Energy Office, now the Department of Energy Resources, and GOPIF in consultation with partners to explore a pilot program for home energy navigation and coaching. And the work led to LD 2220 this session, which provided $100,000 in funding to the Department of Energy Resources, one-time funding to create the Maine Home Energy Navigator and Coaching Resource Hub. And so that law will go into effect next month. And once it's developed, this hub will offer online resources, training, and program materials to help communities build effective energy coaching programs. Programs like that provide personalized support that helps people overcome barriers to participating in energy efficiency upgrades, including limited time, digital literacy challenges, and the complexity of navigating available incentives and financing options. So very excited to see that work move forward. And many of you in this room helped to shape those recommendations. So thank you for your participation in that work. The legislature also opened the door to plug-in solar and storage systems in Maine through LD 1730. The bill establishes clear definitions, capacity limits, and technical requirements to support safe adoption while reducing costs and barriers by exempting eligible systems from traditional interconnection processes. Plug-in solar can help expand access to renewable energy, particularly for renters and residents of multi-unit buildings who may not have access to traditional rooftop solar. And so while these systems are not designed to power an entire home, they can offset a portion of household electricity costs. Through LD 2140, the Efficiency Maine Trust is also going to establish a voluntary demand response program, along with outreach and education efforts to encourage customers to reduce electricity use during periods of high demand. The goal is to reduce electric bills and also strengthen grid reliability. And the demand response program will complement other programs at Efficiency Maine Trust, including incentives for efficiency, weatherization, and other demand response programs. The legislature also strengthened transparency and consumer protections for Maine residents considering community solar subscriptions or solar leasing options. Under LD 2140, solar sales representatives will be required to provide clear, accurate, and consistent information so consumers can make informed decisions. The bill also directs the Department of Energy Resources to develop standardized disclosure forms to support implementation across the energy, and those forms are now available on DOER's website. LD 1876 provides one-time funding of $90,000 for 3 fellows in the Maine Service Fellows Program. These fellows support rural, underserved communities to address critical needs and build resilience. The supplemental budget also included an annual allocation of $7.5 million from the general fund for the Low Income Assistance Program, which helps eligible low-income households manage their electricity costs. This marks the first time in Maine history that the Maine legislature has established ongoing general fund support for the program. And the supplemental budget also directed 25% of interest earnings from the Budget Stabilization Fund to the Land for Maine's Future program. This is another historic step, the first time the legislature has created an ongoing funding source for land conservation in Maine. While additional investment will still be needed to meet our long-term conservation goals, establishing a dedicated funding source is an important milestone and creates a stronger foundation for future progress. Finally, LD 1870 directs the Department of Environmental Protection to take a closer look at what climate change has already cost Maine. The study will examine the economic impacts of greenhouse gas emissions, including damage to infrastructure and natural resources, as well as the broader costs borne by communities and taxpayers from 1995 to 2024. And this information will provide an important foundation for future policy discussions, including proposals related to polluter accountability. Finally, at the close of the session, Governor Mills also signed an executive order establishing the Maine Data Center Advisory Council. Co-chaired by the Department of Energy Resources and the Department of Environmental Protection, the council will evaluate large-scale data center development in Maine and will deliver policy recommendations to the legislature in 2027 focused on protecting ratepayers, maintaining electric grid reliability, minimizing environmental impacts, and supporting responsible economic development. So together, these developments demonstrate how important state leadership is for climate action. These initiatives are focused on ensuring that climate action delivers real benefits for Maine people, from lowering household energy costs to strengthening community resilience, expanding access to clean energy, and helping us better understand the costs of climate change as we plan for the future. And that brings me to 2 studies that I wanted to mention this year that GoPIF is working on. Both Maine Won't Wait and the Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission Plan for Infrastructure Resilience highlighted the growing costs of climate change and extreme weather events, as well as the need for additional resources to support resilience investments across the state. Earlier this year, we began work to develop recommendations on resilience funding and financing. The first step was to better understand the needs of communities across Maine and the financial resources that they currently have access to. This month, we're beginning work with a consultant team to review the community feedback, review the existing recommendations from the Climate Plan and the Infrastructure Commission report, and the consultant will then work with us to identify opportunities to strengthen Maine's approach to funding and finance resilience investments. So we look forward to sharing the results of this work at the September Climate Council meeting, which will focus on funding and financing strategies to support the implementation of Maine Won't Wait. GOPIF is also preparing to release an RFP in the coming weeks for an economic analysis of climate risks and Maine's current resilience investments. So this study will help us better understand the economic impacts and social benefits of our resilience programs and builds on the work previously done in 2020 with the cost of doing nothing analysis. So those are the reports and highlights from the legislative session and the 2 RFPs. And with that, I wanted to turn to another important piece of work. In April, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee released its interim report. We all know that effective policy and smart investments depend on having the best available science to inform our decisions. The Scientific and Technical Subcommittee of the Maine Climate Council has once again produced a report that helps ensure that our work remains grounded in a strong scientific foundation. Their work is especially important right now as some of the federal data sets, research programs, and scientific resources that have traditionally informed climate planning face uncertainty. And I want to especially thank the subcommittee members and the co-chairs for their work, sharing their expertise and all of the effort that went into producing this report. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, it is really accessible and easy to understand. And I know that that's no small feat for a scientific summary of climate impacts. And so I just would really encourage you all to take a look at it. It's a great report. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susie and Ivan to share some of the key findings and some of their recent work to monitor the scientific reports that help inform Maine's climate planning. Thank you.
I'm red-green color deficient, so I can put any button I want on this. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Ivan Fernandez, University of Maine, and co-chair of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. I have the honor of being co-chair with my co-chair, Dr. Susie Arnold from the Island Institute. Our charge this afternoon, our charge this afternoon was to just take a few minutes to talk about and describe and not really go through the details of essentially these 2 initiatives related to the work of STS. One, as Sarah already indicated, was the interim report, and the other is a pilot investigation that we've been doing, having to do with changing landscape of the federal policy towards science. And you'll hear more about that a little bit in a minute. I got to get used to looking over there instead of over here. So just as a reminder, and many of you have heard us talk about this before, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee is one of the 2 subcommittees of the Maine Climate Council. It's about 45 scientists from Maine, essentially internationally and nationally recognized for their science, but also the world's experts on the science of climate change here in Maine that work together in order to produce the products of the STS, which are primarily the science assessments. Our charge is to, first and foremost, assess the most relevant science that is related to what we do here relative to the implementation of Maine Won't Wait, and support the development of Maine Won't Wait through the working groups and the council itself. And in addition, to identify information needs, data monitoring, research that's essential to us moving forward that needs more attention, more investment, and what have you. That second one has been a part of the reporting that we've done in 2020 and in 2024, but now it also encompasses the area that already just mentioned, having to do with the changing federal landscape relative to climate science assets. And so we'll mention that in a minute. So the products, I know you're all familiar with these documents immediately, but if you're not, they are the science assessment products that the STS has developed over the years since we've been in existence, essentially since 2019. All of them, by the way, are available as PDFs to download on the, if you just Google Maine Climate Council STS, you'll land on our page and it has the PDFs of these documents. The first one on the left was the first science assessment, very comprehensive science assessment that we did in 2020. It was and is targeted to provide science that supported the work that many of you in the room were doing in working groups, and then ultimately the council itself for the release of the first Maine Won't Wait report I think that one was December 1st in 2020. And that was Maine's first integrated climate action plan, integrated in that it included both mitigation and adaptation. And it was well grounded in and being informed by the science. And I appreciate the comments from Sarah as one of our council co-chairs in supporting the importance of science in policy making. And that's been consistent over the years. In 2021, we released a short report that had focused on a few different areas at the time that was updating some information. In 2024, we produced the second major science assessment. This built on the first one. It didn't necessarily start from zero and repeat. And that was in support, of course, the work that everyone in the room was involved in the development of the quadrennial update of Maine Won't Wait. And as Sarah had mentioned, about 2 months ago, we released the 2026 report, which took a little different approach. I'll take a minute to tell you about it in shameless advertising. But in order to provide information and remind everyone that the science of climate change goes on, that our climate is continuing to change, and that it's important to continue to utilize the best available science relevant to what we do here in Maine, relevant to what's happening here in Maine in the work that we all do in the council. So Sarah preempted me. That's our table of contents. Now you really should have it memorized. But this time we took the approach of having short, what we called indicators, and an indicator could be particular measurements, or it could be sort of a category like human health or forestry, and spent 2 or 3 pages to try to describe some important either updates or new insights, and it varied depending on the topic. And there were 19 of these, and they range everywhere from, of course, climate science to forests, to food waste, to human health, et cetera. The beginning of the report always starts, all of our reports always start with a section that's an introduction, tells us who STS is, what we do. There's always a section that points to other climate science resources like Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, the National Climate Assessment, World Meteorological Organization annual reports, et cetera. So it's a gateway for readers to the larger body of science. And in this report, then we also spent a very short section doing what scientists are charged with doing too often, which is talking about the reality of the data and the findings of our changing climate. And so we mentioned the results and the analyses that show that the last 11 years are the hottest 11 years on the planet, that the oceans are continuing to warm, that extreme events are continuing to increase. Fire season in many areas is all year round, et cetera, et cetera. And we also point to the tremendous strides globally that have been made in renewable energies and in resilience. And so a lot of progress, not enough, not fast enough, but we're definitely moving and increasingly so in the right direction. So that's the nature of the report. We end with a few comments on hope, but I'll let Susie take you there. This is an outline of kind of the template of the indicators. And so to tempt you to be interested, to flip through this if you haven't already. Each of the templates roughly followed this format, the indicator title telling you what it was, why it matters, why do we use these data? What do the data tell us in the case of whatever is being presented for that indicator? What are we doing about it? Which this was a room full of experts about what we're doing about it, but we tie that activity to some of these indicators. Critical science assets, assets at risk, and this speaks directly to the reality that there's been dramatic change in the last year and a half to the federal position, funding, and future outlook for science. We have become accustomed to building science, climate change programs around the available federal science, and that's readily available on websites, et cetera, up until the recent past. Those assets are not as assured. Some of those assets have changed. And so as we think about how we build our programs and our policies going forward, we need to consider what are the most important science assets to do the work that we do, and what's the risk of them not being there when we need them. And then finally, some comments about what to watch going forward, reports, weather events, et cetera. So I'm not going to, for the sake of time, walk through this, but the executive summary of the 2026 report talks about now the climate change that's taking place here in Maine. Of course, climate is continuing to warm. The ocean is still getting warmer, although some interesting details that are in the report that explain some of the variability with that. Ice is melting, ecosystems are under stress. Sometimes that means they're growing better, but other times, quite often, there are negative consequences. Extremes are increasing, and we get to breathe smoke from fires, even though it's not burning in Maine, just about every year now. So we're living in a different time. We also point to the tremendous progress that we've been hearing about, that we're here to talk about today as a result of the work that you all do. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Susie.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to actually begin with something that we referenced in the closing thoughts of the report Ivan just discussed. And I'm glad I brought my notes because I'm actually going to read that quote up there. So in our 2024 full assessment update, the second report, or the second full assessment, we closed the report for the first time on a chapter on hope. Not the emotion, but the science of hope, which tells us that hope arises from setting personally meaningful goals, having the agency and determination to pursue solutions, and having a plan to get there. We believed Maine people have that determination, and we believed Maine Won't Wait offered meaningful climate goals and cost-effective, science-informed pathways to achieve them. We still believe this is true. So today we have an added challenge given the de-emphasis on science at the federal level. States can no longer treat federal partnership as a guaranteed foundation for their climate goals. So this is yet another opportunity to apply the science of hope to move our climate goals forward. So this brings us to the second topic of our presentation today, which is our investigation into the changing federal science policy impacts on Maine climate science assets. So to put it very simply, our goal is to retain Maine's ability to meet our climate action goals. To improve our agency, we want to understand the rapidly changing federal science landscape and associated risks. And our pathways towards achieving that goal are to recommend methods to support Maine's most vulnerable critical science assets. Okay, so just to back up slightly, and Ivan touched on our definition of science assets, but what we mean by that are the personnel, the researchers, the graduate students, the advisory boards, funding, obviously, monitoring programs, infrastructure like sensors, oceanographic buoys, weather balloons, and data archives. So what you're seeing here is an example that we pulled from the Gulf of Maine temperature indicator in that Earth Week report that Ivan was talking about. So as he mentioned, there's 19 indicators in that report. And at the end of each of the 2 to 3 pages, we had the authors list what are those critical science assets that you need to continue to track those important climate science indicators for Maine. And as you'll notice here, you might not be able to read that, so I'll tell you. The critical science assets that are mentioned there for monitoring Gulf of Maine temperature, many of them are federally funded assets. So when federal funding is deprioritized away from these assets, states risk losing the specific tools that they need to track, assess, mitigate, and respond to the impacts of climate change. So as Ivan referenced, and many of you know, he and I and our colleagues on the STS have been tracking this for over a year now. So I'll walk you through kind of that progression to provide an update to where we're at today. So last year around this time, I guess in May, a month earlier than 13 months ago, we polled our science colleagues on the STS to see how the assets that they rely on to do their job are at risk. What's the status? So kind of a pulse check from our 40 plus colleagues and their colleagues and how that's impacting their ability to carry forward the goals of Maine won't wait. We summarized the robust response that we got from our colleagues a year ago during the quarterly Climate Council meeting in June of 2025. And then Ivan and I attempted to track those assets that were listed and realized what an impossible task that was to do off the sides of our desk. And so at the September quarterly Maine Climate Council meeting, we suggested there needs to be a more robust response to kind of tracking the status of things. So later that fall, a private foundation came forward and offered excitedly to fund that part-time position. So we hired Dr. Nicole Spalding in January of 2026 and really began the work in earnest. Many of you would have received a survey that we sent out to the entire Maine Climate Council community back in April, trying to, again, get a sense of how your work is being impacted. So that assessment is ongoing, as well as other risk assessments of science assets in Maine Won't Wait. And specifically, Dr. Spalding conducted a risk assessment of our 2024 assessment, and she found over 150 federally supported science assets in that report alone. So the work is currently underway to synthesize all of these findings. And I'm going to walk you through 3 policy shifts. Oh, there's a screen right there. I'm going to walk you through 3 policy shifts that weaken the scientific foundations that states rely on. So first, the administrative realignment and expertise attrition. So, for example, what we mean by this is technical positions and advisory capacity that has shrunk. Another example is the grant hiring and the grant and hiring filters that are disrupting the talent pipeline. So, in general, that state effect of that shifting policy initiative is less expert support for planning and regulation. So the second policy shift is around reduced fiscal investments in science. Some examples of that are climate-focused grants are cut or redirected, disaster aid becomes less predictable, and that results in more fiscal pressure and slower project delivery. So lastly, the shift around technological and archival transition. So what do we mean by that? That's where climate information has become harder to find, less accessible, and in some cases, states need mirrored data in independent repositories. The state effect there being a weaker evidence base for policy and legal defense. So together, these shifts really create a cascade of state-level impacts, and our core message being that the result is not simply slower progress, but a broader decision support crisis in which states may retain formal climate goals while losing the technical and fiscal infrastructure needed to carry them out. So these pressures, unfortunately, are felt unequally, and they're impacting smaller and rural communities that rely most heavily on shared federal resources. So relying on federal consistency has moved from somewhat of a standard operating procedure to a strategic vulnerability. And it's in laying out these vulnerabilities where we can better identify the gaps and start to see pathways for the state to secure the foundation. And we think that this is a conversation worth having. So there's no question that this is a challenge, but we all know that Maine does things a little differently. We've repeatedly proven that Maine can and will lead on climate, and our home is worth the effort. So to end with some more deep musings by Ivan and I, from our Earth Week report, we closed with, we understand that science is not the whole answer to climate change, but it is an indispensable part of the toolkit. Every scientific success for the betterment of humans and the planet is an opportunity to show that the future we want is possible. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ivan and Susie, and thank you for ending with a hopeful note after what was otherwise some depressing information about losing access to federal data. Let's see. So I'm going to give you a brief update on the Department of Environmental Protection's biennial greenhouse gas report. Some of you may recall, this is a report that DEP produces every 2 years, and we are charged by the legislature with assessing our progress towards meeting Maine's greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. So that report is due every year by December 1st. The inventory that the report is based on estimates actual emissions of 6 greenhouse gases that occur within Maine's territorial boundaries, which we refer to as gross greenhouse gas emissions. DEP has been doing this report since 2004, and for all those years, we've relied on a federal data set from the EPA as the foundation for that inventory, and then augmented that with more specific information from other state of Maine sources. Thanks to the University of Maine and the Maine Forest Service, some of our more recent iterations of that inventory in the report have included an assessment of our progress toward our goal of net carbon neutrality, taking into consideration carbon sequestration in our forests, farms, soils, and marine environment. So it's given us a much more comprehensive look at our impacts on greenhouse gas emissions. But unfortunately, EPA is no longer updating that data set that we'd relied on for our gross emissions inventory. Fortunately, a little ray of hope, we have been able to work with the U.S. Climate Alliance and the University of Maryland. They are backfilling that data set for us for all of the states who had been relying on it. So we are anticipating that we will still be able to produce the report by the deadline. We had actually hoped to have it out now so that I was supposed to be presenting to you the results of our inventory in that report. I don't have those results yet because, as I said, we're trying to backfill that data, but I do have instead here for you a little bit of a preview. So this is based on energy consumption information from the Energy Information Administration. Generally speaking, every time that we've done our emissions analysis, our gross greenhouse gas emissions tend to track pretty closely with fossil fuel combustion for energy generation. And so if this is energy consumption information, and if you look at sort of the top of that gray line, Everything from there down is what would get counted in our gross greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So yes, waste combustion, biofuels count, wood combustion counts, that all emits carbon and it's counted in the gross inventory. So you can see generally that we've had pretty good reductions. We're supposed to compare our emissions to the 1990 baseline. If we just relied on this data to make an estimate, we're about 20% below that 1990 level. But you can see in the last few years since COVID, there has been a little bit of an increase. So that's something that we're going to be really interested in talking to you all about in the coming months as we're able to produce that report. We'll be doing a webinar to go over all those results with you. But as we enter into this next phase of planning, that's going to be data that's really important for us to have to think about what it means for some of the policy choices we need to make and some of the actions that we want to take to continue to make progress towards meeting our goals. And so with that, I'm going to give this back to David, I believe. Okay.
Okay. So, all right. Thanks, Melanie, and thanks, everyone. I'll invite Sarah up as well. You guys get to take seats. So the next little piece we're going to do here is really thinking about the landscape of what's going on across the country and what's going on in Maine, because we need to ground ourselves in the opportunities that are presenting themselves now in Maine and elsewhere. Sarah and Melanie are going to have a little conversation about that. I'm going to step off and let you have that conversation. Then we're going to bring in Casey from the U.S. Climate Alliance, who's going to join you in that conversation. If all goes well in our webinar world. If not, I will vamp and we'll figure out what to do. But in the meantime, let's assume it's all going to work really well. So Melanie and Sarah, you're going to have a little chit chat about what you're seeing here in Maine and some of the realities you're working with. This is going to set us up. The whole purpose of this conversation is to set us up for thinking about priorities for the next 2 years and to really dive into that. And we're going to do that more intensely amongst all of us after the break. Okay? But let me turn it over. Sarah, Melanie, you have some words that you've prepared and some thoughts in a conversation you want to have about how to meet the moment. So over to you.
Is this on? Yep, it is. All right. Thanks, David. So if you can picture that this is a recreation of a conversation, because obviously I'm going to read from some notes here, because if I didn't, then I would forget to say all the things I actually want to say. So apologies for it looking less like a conversation and more like a speech. But as David had said with the prompt, there are some things that I think we want to say pretty directly. While there are still some federal resources available, we do not have the level of federal support that existed when we developed the 2024 Maine Won't Wait update. In some areas, including renewable energy development, federal actions are actively creating new barriers to progress. Those changes are slowing progress in some areas of the plan, but they are not stopping us. So I just wanted to remind you all how this all began. So when the Climate Council was formed in 2019, Maine had not updated its climate action plan for more than a decade. There'd been relatively little action that was coordinated by the state during that time. Thank you, Nathan Robbins, for helping us with that all those years. And in many ways, we were building the foundation from the ground up when we started in 2019 and when this council began its work. In short order, the council, the Science and Technical Subcommittee, and the working groups came together for a planning process that was grounded in science, focused on practical and implementable solutions, and ambitious in its vision for Maine's future. Then, as you will recall, just as we began the enormous task of developing recommendations that were going to touch on nearly every sector of Maine's economies and all of its communities, we had COVID. But, as we've talked about before, this council figured out how to move forward. We adapted and ultimately delivered an award-winning climate plan. We always knew the plan was ambitious, and we recognized in 2020, remember, we talked about we want to do a lot, but we don't have any money to do it. And all the resources that we needed to implement those recommendations, we said, let's not put the recommendations forward. We'll figure out how to pay for it. So we built a roadmap that was flexible and adaptable And this enabled us to take advantage of new opportunities as they emerged, which they did. So when the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and other federal investments became available, Maine was ready to act and take advantage of those. So using the climate action plan that we already had in place, Maine was able to secure substantial federal funding and put those resources right to work in our communities all across the state. Along the way, we also recognized that our work needed a stronger focus on equity, and we are grateful to the members of the Equity Subcommittee to help us with that. They helped us to strengthen the plan and ensure that climate solutions are reaching more Mainers and delivering really meaningful benefits. And we have real results to show for our work. Maine has now installed more than 200,000 heat pumps, helping households reduce their reliance on expensive heating fuels while expanding access to cooling as extreme heat becomes more common. The clean energy sector in Maine supports more than 16,000 jobs, and we have the fastest growing clean energy economy in all of New England. Maine continues to make steady progress toward our goal of achieving 60% clean energy by 2030. Following the devastating storms of 2023 and 2024, Maine made the largest resilient investment in state history, $60 million to support recovery and strengthen preparedness for future events. Then, on top of that, we won a historic $69 million grant from NOAA to further our resilience work. And we didn't lose it, we still have it. Through the Land for Maine's Future program, Maine has supported 98 new conservation projects that protect our landscape, working lands, and natural resources. And nearly 300 communities are now participating in the Community Resilience Partnership, which got an awful lot of shout outs in the Menti earlier. Those communities are acting on the priorities that matter most to them, whether that's revitalizing their downtown, creating heating and cooling centers, reducing their municipal energy costs, strengthening their water supplies for firefighting, or planning infrastructure improvements that support their local economy and their working waterfronts. So the challenges that we face today are real, we know that, but we've had to face challenges before, and we've navigated uncertainty before. Our success has never been based on having perfect circumstances. It has come from having a clear vision, strong partnerships, and a willingness to adapt when conditions change. Sarah.
Thanks, Melanie. I think, thank you for that. It's a helpful reminder of where we've all been together and how far we've come. I think what I would add is that this moment really continues to underscore for me the importance of state and local leadership. I was thrilled at all the shout outs to the Community Resilience Partnership earlier. When we've talked previously, and when we pull together the annual report every year, one of the things that continues to really resonate with me is the leadership across the state on climate action. And so it is state agencies, but it is also community leaders and partners and nonprofit organizations and all of the folks that are sitting here in this room who are implementing the state's climate action plan. And I think that is what makes it so resilient and makes our implementation so successful. As the landscape for implementing the plan becomes more challenging, I think that state and local leadership becomes even more important. We can't necessarily control all of the circumstances within which we are operating, but we certainly can control how we prepare and respond. And I think the story that Melanie tells about sort of the work that we did to create the plan and how that set us up for being able to take advantage of opportunities when they arose, I think that really helps me think about the work that we're doing right now. So the question that we're going to focus on in our discussion today is sort of what parts of Maine Won't Wait are ready to make progress at this moment. We're at the midpoint in implementation of the 2024 plan. Next year, we'll kick off the 2028 planning process. But for right now, there is a moment where we can continue to lean in and make progress. And so I think what we wanted to hear from all of you today is where does it make sense to do that? Where should we be focusing right now? And there are sort of three categories that come to mind in terms of when something is ready for progress. And so one of those is there are areas where resources, partnerships, and political support continue to exist. And so those are great places to continue to lean in and do important implementation work. There are also, as we talked about at our last Climate Council meeting, there are lots of ways that climate action accomplishes multiple goals for Maine people and households and communities. And so we can respond to climate change while also helping people with housing issues, energy affordability, and creating opportunity. And so I think places where federal action is making climate harder are also making other things more harder. And so where are the climate solutions that we can lean into that accomplish multiple goals for Maine people? And then finally, just remembering that this moment won't last forever. And so thinking about, again, as Melanie was saying, the importance of laying the groundwork, of having the plan, building the relationships, being ready for when opportunities arrive. The Climate Council is in statute. Our emissions goals are in statute. Our goals go to 2050. And so we are in this for the long term. And so thinking about what can we be doing now to position ourselves so that we are ready when opportunity rises again.
With that, we're going to do a quick sort of Q&A and initial conversation in the room as we wait for Casey to get online. If that sounds like a good idea to you.
Sure.
Sounds great, right? Okay, so Melanie and Sarah are teeing us up. They're putting some ideas on the table about, okay, if we really had to think about how to make progress in the next 2 years, this is what we could do, right? Sarah put out some ideas, some criteria right now. You all, in your first word cloud, if you remember, put some ideas on the table too, like, hey, it sounds like resilience is a place to think about. It sounds like funding is a place to think about. It sounds like some of those words that popped up. This is a chance for us as a group, before we go on break and before we have a deeper conversation about it, to start to throw some ideas out there. Like, what do the next 2 years really look like? How do we make progress? What's right for this work? So, I open it up to the floor. We've got a mic in the back somewhere. This mic, in theory, should work if I can figure out how to make it work correctly. David, go this one. And if you have questions for Melanie and Sarah, this is an opportunity to offer those questions. Here's a hand right here. If I can get a mic over to here.
This works now, yeah.
Coming in fast. Who's going to win?
Hi, thank you. Representative Amanda Collmore, member of the Climate Council. I'm curious, we all know the big unknown coming up in November here, how we are planning for the resilience of the resilience, knowing that we have a brand new governor, and we don't know who, and we have a brand new number of House members and Senate members because so many have termed out. There's potential for bodies flipping majorities. I don't think the Senate, but we're looking at potentially the House that only lost by 67 votes last year. How are we planning for that? Because you can't tie one legislature to the actions of another, so statute can change. And we've got great programs like the culvert program I mentioned on the Menti thing that we don't want to go away.
Do you want me to go first? Thank you for the question. It's a really important question. I think the Maine Climate Council and the law that created it was passed in a bipartisan way. I think that we have incredible support for the work that the Climate Council has been doing. And I think that the momentum that we've built sort of supports, yes, things are in statute, and yes, things can be changed. But it was a really big deal to establish the Climate Council, to require the climate action plan, to put the emissions targets in statute. And that was bipartisan when the law was passed and signed. And I think what we've seen over the last 7 years is the momentum building with the hundreds of people who've participated in the working groups and in the Climate Council. The 300 communities that are working to take action at the local level. I think there's real recognition of the urgency of the moment. The storms that we had a couple years ago, I think really were a big wake-up call for a lot of people, that we are experiencing the impacts of climate now, and we need to be preparing. And so I think what this group has done is laid a really solid foundation for us to continue to build upon. And I think that's what we're going to lean into in the coming months as we think about a transition.
I guess I would add that we know that many of the actions that we have taken, the recommendations that we have in the plan, are not just about mitigating the effects of climate change. We have focused as a group on those kind of actions that have multiple benefits, like we talked about earlier. And so regardless of political affiliation, regardless of your opinion about whether or not climate change is actually happening, we know that those storms hit. That happened. That's going to happen again, right? That is very predictable. We are making investments in energy efficiency that are lowering people's electric bills. We're doing things that are good for the people of Maine that hopefully will generate ongoing support for the work of this council, because this, the work that we're doing has much broader benefits that apply to people all across the state. This isn't just about one region of the state. It's not just one economic sector. And we had for so many years communities that were asking for us to help them. They were coming to the state saying, we need guidance. We want somebody to help us with planning. And this council has answered that. We've created the Community Resilience Partnership. There are things that have happened that are things that were demanded across many different political landscapes over many, many years in Maine. So I think that hopefully there will be others coming in who see the benefit of the work that's been done and will continue to support it.
Love that question. Other reflections or questions about the years ahead when you think about what's going to really be important? Judy?
Thanks, Hannah. So in the context of the transportation sector being the highest generator of greenhouse gases, and that we have a very robust telecommuting policy across state government, I don't know how many employees, but it's in the multiple thousands. I remember when we were doing the telework agreements, we had to describe the mileage that we would travel versus what if we stayed at home. And it occurred to me that that would become metrics to justify continued telecommuting across the state workforce. Is that happening? Will we be able to describe just how much greenhouse gas emissions are being reduced by the teleworking policy? And the reason I ask is it's a significant recruitment tool and retention tool for state employees. Any thoughts on that?
I do not recall there being a survey done recently, but Judy, that is a great question and probably something that we do want to do before the end of the year, because it's a pretty easy calculation. We just need to know how many people are still teleworking. It is less than it was back, during the pandemic, but it's a pretty significant amount. And you're absolutely right. I mean, for state recruitment and retention, we have a lot of candidates that emphasize hybrid working as an important opportunity for them. And it makes a big difference in terms of both greenhouse gas emissions as well as all transportation-related emissions. And right now, with the price of gas going through the roof, then the less you have to drive, the more money you save too.
So we have Casey Katims with us now, and so I thought we'd take a moment here and bring Casey on the screen if folks in the tech world can do that. Casey, hi. How's it going?
Good. I'm feeling pretty jealous that I don't get to be there in person with you all.
Yeah, it's happening in this room right now. Yeah. Sarah, you going to introduce Casey?
Yeah.
All right. I'll let Sarah introduce you, Casey, and then we'll give you the floor. So, Sarah, over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Welcome, Casey. So great to see you. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. So for folks, I think many of folks in this room are probably aware, but since 2019, Maine has been a part of the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is a bipartisan coalition of governors committed to sustaining and strengthening America's response to climate change. Together, the alliance represents 54% of the U.S. population and 59% of the U.S. economy. And while Maine is proud to be a leader in climate action, we are also in good company, and we are not doing this work alone. Through the U.S. Climate Alliance, I have had the opportunity to work with teams from other states and to hear how they are navigating this moment, and it is always inspiring. Each state is operating in a different context, but across the board, I hear about new policies, ideas, and different ways of addressing challenges that are very similar to what we are facing here in Maine. And so even though the news right now often leans toward doom and gloom on climate change, it's important to understand the challenges that we're facing, but it can also obscure the real progress that is happening, and that the vast majority of Americans, including Mainers, continue to support action on climate. So we've invited Casey Katims, the Executive Director of the U.S. Climate Alliance, to come speak with us so that you all can hear from Casey how this moment is playing out in other states, and also the inspiring work that they are doing to adapt and make progress in this challenging context. And so, Casey, thank you very much for joining us today. It's great to see you.
Of course, great to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to present and hopefully insert a note of optimism and hope about all of the great work that is ongoing, not just in Maine, but in states across the country. Just as a threshold matter, I just want to confirm, I think that there's going to be some slides to support the presentation today. Can you all see those already?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, great. So great to be here. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Casey Katims, Executive Director of the U.S. Climate Alliance. We at the Alliance Secretariat are really proud to support 24 states and territories across the country who are members of the U.S. Climate Alliance and have committed to working toward achievement of the U.S.'s climate goals under the Paris Agreement. I think we can move forward to the next slide, which is just a brief overview. I'm just going to speak for a minute about sort of who the Alliance is. I'll get to the moment that we're in, and I think you guys have already probably spent a fair bit of time today talking about the unique moment that we're in for climate change and climate action in the US. And then we'll talk about some coalition-wide progress sort of across sectors of the economy and across policy priorities and across the coalition. So I think we move to the next slide. So as Sarah noted, states and governors remain absolutely essential leaders for climate and clean energy policy. Something that I like to just sort of remind everyone all of the time is that state authority is actually embedded in the US Constitution. The 10th Amendment is very clear that states have independent authority separate from the federal government to advance solutions that make most sense for their states and their residents. And states like Maine, but as you can see, you're in really good company across the country. We've got folks as far away as Guam and Hawaii. We've got folks in the Midwest, in the Southeast, in the Southwest, who are all leveraging and tapping that independent state authority to press forward on climate and clean energy solutions. I think we can move to the next slide. And this is just, I think a really helpful reminder that the impact that you're having is not just on reducing greenhouse gas pollution, which of course you are doing, but we're also delivering a whole lot of additional benefits to Mainers and Americans across the country who are benefiting from these climate and clean energy solutions at the state and local level. Whether that's cleaner air or lower costs, better preparedness for disasters and recovery, more economic growth, more good-paying jobs. The solutions that we're delivering today are helping people in their real lives. And the reality is that climate policy is a kitchen table issue just like anything else. And I think it behooves all of us to remind folks how many additional co-benefits come with advancing climate solutions. Let's move to the next slide. So I just want to sort of give a real note and shout out to all of you as part of the Maine climate story. You have so much to be proud of in terms of solutions and policies and innovation that you've advanced under Governor Mills since you all joined the Climate Alliance in 2019. Our coalition actually used to be co-chaired by just 3 states who never changed. It used to be co-chaired by California, Washington, and New York, who are the 3 states who founded the Alliance. We expanded our leadership structure in 2023, and Governor Mills was actually the very first state other than those original 3 to step up and serve as co-chair of the U.S. Climate Alliance, alongside Governor Inslee of Washington State. And we were so thrilled to have her step onto the national stage and bring Maine's story and Maine's successes and experiences and context to the national stage to, again, benefit not just Mainers, but folks across our coalition. You all, I think we helped inspire us. And so, Governor Mills, as you all know, has been a real leader on heat pump installations as a key affordability metric, in addition to a key way of driving down emissions in the building sector. And her work and her leadership in Maine really inspired all of us to move forward. And in 2023, we announced a coalition-wide commitment to quadruple heat pump installations across the U.S. Climate Alliance by the end of the decade to eventually achieve 20 million heat pumps installed across all of our states and territories. We are so thrilled to see you all surpass your own goals, set new goals for yourself. But just want to sort of note that Governor Mills brought your experience to the forefront and helped, I think, move a lot of states forward in the decarbonization of our building sector, and we're making real progress as a result of that. Next slide. I'm just going to sort of, acknowledge, I think that Sarah and others have already done a really nice job sort of speaking to the moment that we're in, the very clear national headwinds that we're up against. I think it's important to acknowledge that, but also not allow ourselves to be discouraged by those headwinds. So let's move to the next slide. I think you guys have already discussed a lot of this as it pertains to Maine, but what I think it's important for you all to know is Maine is not alone, right? Every single state across the US is facing similar challenges and similar headwinds, and it is having an impact on the speed with which we're able to deploy climate and clean energy solutions during this period of time. Whether that's federal rollbacks to key sort of foundational federal programs, rules, and actions. The loss of federal scientific enterprise has been a real loss. And there's a lot of work that you all are doing alongside other alliance states and territories to ensure that we continue to have access to accurate, reliable greenhouse gas emissions reporting data. There's been work underway to sort of undermine the clear scientific consensus behind greenhouse gas pollution and climate change. Obviously, federal funding cuts have put an impact on all of us. There have been efforts to try and limit states' ability to leverage that independent authority that I mentioned at the top of my presentation. And the reality is that governors across the coalition and across the country are grappling with a whole range of competing priorities to ensure that your people, your communities are safe, protected, and continue to have an opportunity to thrive. And that is, of course, putting a lot of strain, in particular on the budgetary side, on governors' ability to advance climate and clean energy solutions. So that's, we're just going to sort of name that and put that aside for a moment. And I just want to make sure it's clear that, it's not just states like Maine. States, I think states that are sort of big blue states like California and New York are facing similar challenges. And this is sort of, I think, what I want to leave you with as we sort of go into the sort of a showcase of solutions across alliance states and territories is every single bit of progress that we can make during this period of time is a win. And I think that a lot of us, particularly those of us who work in and day out on climate policy, on greenhouse gas emissions, it becomes really easy to sort of become really laser focused on exactly how much we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by exactly what date and exactly what trajectory are we on. And that can make moments like this where our progress is being slowed, I think feel really hard and challenging to figure out how to keep moving forward. And the message that Sarah can validate this, but the thing that I say over and over again is every single ton of greenhouse gas emissions reduced is a win. Every single electric vehicle that's put on our roads, every single EV charger that is installed on our roadways, every single acre of natural land where carbon is being sequestered, these are all wins. And it's important to acknowledge how much progress we've already made. Across the US Climate Alliance, we have already reduced our net greenhouse gas emissions by 24% below our 2005 baseline. So that's nearly a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions that we've already reduced. And when you compare us to the rest of the country, we are far surpassing the rest of the country in terms of climate pollution that has already been cut. During that period of time, we've also increased our collective GDP, our collective economy, by 34%. So we have already proved over the last 18 years of work that you can both cut greenhouse gas pollution and you can increase and grow your economies and create good paying jobs. And so as a result of all the work that we've already done, the US is already on a much lower emissions pathway today than was previously expected. And that's thanks to the state and federal policy advancement that we've done. That's due to market transformation. That is due to the fact that, clean energy and clean technologies are just mature technologies now. We all know that deploying wind and solar and storage are some of the fastest, cheapest ways to get new energy added to the grid. And that is what is sustaining this transition, even during this period of challenge. We're seeing the same thing happening globally, which is just clean energy and clean technologies are very clearly taking off. Throughout the beginning of the current federal administration, that progress has continued. And 92% of new electricity added to America's grid last year was clean energy. And so despite the rhetoric, despite the headwinds, despite some of the things that we hear the president say, the reality is that we are continuing to make progress. And what's most important is that we just keep focusing on making as much progress as we possibly can and make sure that we are prepared to, make up the ground and pick up the pace when we next have an opportunity at the federal level. And the final thing I'll just sort of leave you with is, I think it's really easy to allow ourselves to believe that climate change is like a win or lose, on or off switch. Like we've either won the fight against climate change or lost the fight against climate change. But the reality is that that's not how global warming is happening. Global warming is projected to continue. And the question is, how much is it going to continue? And there's a difference between 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius. There's also a difference between 2 and 2.5, a difference between 2.5 and 3. And so what I want to make sure everyone remembers is that every single fraction of a degree of avoided warming matters. It means lives saved. It means homes and businesses protected. It means communities and workers who, remain protected. And so during this period of time, my recommendation to everyone is just focus on continuing to put one foot in front of the other and make as much progress as we possibly can day after day. And so with that, I now get to sort of shift to my optimism tour of coalition-wide progress that is really happening across every single sector of the economy. And so at the Alliance, we work with our states across every sector of the economy. We can move to the next slide. And the next one after that. So states are making progress on every sector of the economy. This is sort of how we divide our work. I know a lot of states divide up their work in slightly different ways and in slightly different buckets, but we are working on tackling emissions in the 4 biggest emitting sectors. That's electricity, transportation, industry, and buildings. We're working on preserving our natural carbon sink by leveraging our natural lands and waters. We're working to ensure that these solutions are supporting good paying jobs, and a just economic transition and promoting environmental justice for overburdened communities. We're working on making sure that our governance, and that's a lot of what you all are doing here, is participating in the governance of Maine's climate policy. So every single sector of the economy, we're seeing progress. And so I'm just going to give you a quick tour through some of the highlights from, I think, the last year and a half or so. Next slide. So this is sort of a more nearby state, but Delaware recently published an update to its climate action plan. And one of the things that I think we wanted to specifically highlight here that we're excited about in terms of Delaware's climate action plan is, for the very first time, they actually included a standalone chapter on the intersection between land use and climate change. I think many of the folks here know that land use is a really powerful tool to help states meet their greenhouse gas emissions targets and also become more climate resilient in terms of transit-oriented development, in terms of our infrastructure. That's a growing area of priority for every single member across the Alliance. And so in response to that, one of the things that the Alliance Secretariat did at our staff in recent years was actually publish a new guidebook called the Climate and Land Use Policy Guidebook. We also hosted a learning lab that Maine participated in that focused on how we can sort of meet these shared goals of managing lands, supporting climate resilience goals, and also making progress towards net zero. And I want to give a shout out to a local hero who many of you may know, Cassie Rose, who I think was the very first climate council coordinator for Maine. She was one of the lead authors of this land use planning guide. And so we're really excited to see states like Delaware take advantage of that opportunity. Next slide. On the building sector, again, states are doing a lot of work on the building sector, whether it's through equipment standards, more efficient building codes and standards, accelerating heat pump deployment towards our 20 million heat pump goal, or utility planning and innovation. We wanted to specifically call your attention to some great work happening in Colorado and Washington on their building performance standards. They are using performance standards to require commercial, multifamily, and public buildings over 50,000 square feet to annually benchmark energy use to meet their greenhouse gas emissions targets. Washington's currently pioneering the nation's first large all-electric new construction for new residential and commercial buildings, and some really ambitious energy efficiency standards. And in Colorado, jurisdictions are able to opt into a low energy carbon code, which includes updated provisions for EV readiness, EV charging requirements, and property credits for heat pump efficiency. So some really exciting work happening on the building sector. Next slide. In climate finance, this is obviously a really big area in light of the loss of a lot of financing through the federal government. We wanted to call your attention to the successful implementation of Washington State's Cap and Invest program, which they call the Climate Commitment Act. The Climate Commitment Act has generated more than $3 billion in Washington over the last few years for climate and clean energy investments, which is helping expand access to free transportation rides for the youth in the state. It's surpassing the law's requirement that 35% of funds go to benefit vulnerable populations. And we're seeing similar successes elsewhere. California's Cap and Invest program was recently extended to 2045. And since that program was launched, more than $18 billion has been awarded to over 500,000 projects in California. And then obviously the RGGI program is another great way that we see revenue being generated through a carbon market-like system. So coming up with revenue generating mechanisms like this has been a really great benefit, I think, to states who are losing federal funding, or at least the certainty of federal funding. Next slide. I know I'm a little bit behind, Sarah, so I'm going to try and sort of speed through some of these, but I don't want to leave any of them behind. On the electricity sector, we wanted to call your attention to a great new law that just passed in Illinois. That they passed something that they call actually, I don't even know what the acronym is, but the Clean and Reliable Affordability Act. I think the most exciting thing about this is setting a statewide target for battery storage. They set a target of installing 3 gigawatts worth of energy storage by 2030, which is enough to power at least 500,000 homes for 24 hours during periods of time of high demand. We are increasingly seeing states embrace battery storage as a solution that is both great for affordability, for the reliability of the grid, and also helps to maximize the clean energy generation of the wind and solar that's already on the grid. Next slide. On the industrial sector, really excited to call attention to work that is happening in Colorado on landfill methane. As folks may know, methane has a lot of sort of near-term immediate warming potential. And so tackling methane emissions is one of the greatest ways that we have to avoid near-term global warming. And increasingly, I think states are looking towards their landfill management and regulatory powers to tackle methane from landfills. And so last year, Colorado finalized its landfill methane regulation to set stricter emissions controls for 32 municipal solid waste landfills, following the footsteps of 5 other Alliance states who have done something similar, including California, Oregon, Maryland, Michigan, and Washington. Next slide. On just transition and equity, there's a lot of really exciting work happening to both support a just economic transition and also to ensure that benefits are meeting disadvantaged communities. I wanted to call your attention to Massachusetts, which recently awarded $7 million in clean energy and climate technology workforce development investments to ensure that workers and environmental justice communities can benefit from the state's growing clean energy economy. We are seeing just an increased focus in making sure that we've got the pipeline of skilled workers who are ready to take advantage of the thousands of good-paying clean energy jobs in climate-ready fields that are coming as a result of the clean energy transition. Next slide. In the natural working land sector, hopefully this is inspiring, folks. It's hard for me to not see, but anyway, hopefully you guys are excited about some of these solutions. Wanted to call your attention to some great work happening in Rhode Island, where they have created, have just sort of taken action to provide $4 million in grants for adaptation and resilience projects on public lands that protect or enhance coastal or riverine habitats. So some really great work happening there. I know that for Delaware, this is also a big deal. They're the lowest lying state in the nation. But really exciting to see some of the work that's happening both from a resilience perspective as well as ensuring that we're protecting our natural carbon sink. Next slide. In Vermont, I think probably you all have heard something about this already, but Vermont recently enacted the nation's first climate superfund law, which is a framework for assessing the costs of climate damages and then securing funding to help communities prepare for, respond to, and recover from climate-related impacts. We have seen similar efforts in New York, which created its own Climate Change Superfund Act that is holding parties accountable who are responsible for climate change for a share of climate-related costs, while supporting community-informed investments in resilience, infrastructure upgrades, and ecosystem restoration. Next slide. On resilience, really excited about some work that's happening in another sort of nearby state, Connecticut. Connecticut is helping communities turn climate resilience plans into action through new funding pathways. They are helping municipalities fund and implement infrastructure projects that reduce climate risks, support economic development, and provide more housing opportunities. And this is through a partnership between the Connecticut Green Bank and the Resilience District Incubator that is helping pilot communities move to stable long-term funding to reduce risk from climate change. Next slide. On transportation, again, going to point your eyes towards Colorado. They created their first ever dedicated transportation funding source in 2021 that has delivered over $220 million for transportation electrification. This is, I think, really important, and I want to just call your attention. Transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions across the U.S. Climate Alliance and across the country. And within that, vehicles are a very, very big part of that share. And so by creating this sort of dedicated funding stream, they may be able to invest in EV incentives, in fast, affordable charging for the public, for electrifying public transit, and also helping to expand access to e-bikes. Next slide. And so I think across all of these, I just want to sort of like call out, I think, some of the similarities that we see across these, which is just there are some core ingredients for success that we're seeing across Alliance states. One is just being really early and forward-looking in their planning process, which I know you all are doing literally with this meeting here today, as well as regular progress tracking, right? Figuring out sort of how you're doing, are you on track, which helps you sort of measure and readjust and realign and recalibrate as needed to develop new solutions to meet your goals. We're seeing that strong engagement with industry and effective partnerships with advocates, with nonprofits, with stakeholders is really, really critical, particularly, I think, in this moment when there's so much, I think, misinformation that is being spread around and in part fueled by the federal government. Making sure that you're really deepening ties within and outside of government is really critical to progress. I think focusing on where your existing goals are and just focusing on implementation. I think that, one of the things that we're sort of recommending states do in this moment is to really focus on what are your core goals and what can you do to just implement, make as much progress as you can towards those existing goals. Making sure to celebrate wins and incremental progress. I think that it's really easy for us to become discouraged by some of the sort of like surround sound negativity these days. And so finding ways to just come together, celebrate wins, incremental progress, no matter how small they might be, is a good way to make sure that you're just sustaining progress and sustaining momentum and not letting yourself get weighed down by any of the stuff that's happening around us. Build on what works, find solutions that are successful in one county and expand them to 5 counties. Find a program that's been successful in 5 states and bring it into your state. Whatever has a record of success, take advantage of those things that are existing proven models and take advantage of them. And then I think always just be willing to innovate, be willing to pivot if you need to, try new strategies, try new approaches if something that you've tried for a while isn't working. But I think, again, the one note I'll leave you with, Sarah, here is just continue to sort of pick yourselves up, dust yourselves off. Don't let yourself get weighed down by the weight of the world and just keep doing everything you possibly can to keep moving forward. And with that, I'll pause. Sorry for taking so much time.
Thanks, Casey. So if we could put Casey, yeah, excellent. So we have just a few minutes before we take a break. If folks have any questions for Casey or any reflections on what his words are, what Sarah and Melanie were talking about, this is a great time because we're going to lose Casey after the break. Any quick thoughts, reactions, questions for Casey as we're thinking about Maine's role in the next 2 years? What are y'all thinking about? Yeah, right here in the front.
Hi, Casey. I'm Lucy. I'm with Volunteer Maine and the Maine Climate Corps. And it wasn't really a question. It's just more thank you to the U.S. Climate Alliance for stepping in and helping with that Climate Corps working group that's now on a national level, since it kind of fell off a little bit after the American Climate Corps was dissolved. So I just wanted to say that it's greatly appreciated and it's a really great resource to have for climate corps across the country to be able to collaborate and hear about what each other is doing. Like Washington Climate Corps, when you were saying that they're cap and trade and some of that money actually goes to them. So it's really great to hear those different solutions that they found.
Well, thank you for your work and for sustaining the work on the Climate Corps at the state and local level during this period of time. I will just say it's our honor and privilege to get a chance to sustain these kinds of solutions that we know are supporting workers, young people who want to get involved in the climate fight during the period of time where we don't have friends at the federal government. And I think across all of the sectors that we talked about today, the one thing I can just assure you is the Climate Alliance persisted through the entirety of the first Trump administration. We're going to persist through the entirety of the second Trump administration. If we have a future federal government at another point in time that once again walks back on climate change, the U.S. Climate Alliance is still going to be here. I think the work that Sarah and her counterparts in governor's offices across the country, what our commitment is to making sure that climate action in the U.S. is here to stay, no matter what happens at the federal level. And so just thank you. I think back to you.
Thanks, Casey. We got another question here. Just give me 1 second. Folks can introduce themselves. Yeah.
Thanks, Casey. This is Josh Caldwell with the Natural Resources Council of Maine. I serve on the Transportation Working Group for the Maine Climate Council. This last year, we just reauthorized Maine's participation in RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We were really bummed not to continue with the Transportation Climate Initiative, which would have been another regional funding mechanism for transportation. And I was just wondering, as we're facing some really stark transportation funding challenges and looking to decarbonize that sector, if you've seen any effective progress towards regional collaboration for funding mechanisms for decarbonization, transportation or otherwise?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think in terms of regional collaboration, I think the reality is that you all have through RGGI, the single best model in the US for what regional collaboration on climate finance can look like. And so, I would always start there as a starting place of what has worked well in RGGI and how can you replicate that model in other sectors or in other regions of the country. But another sort of emerging area that we're excited about is Washington advanced new steps last year to link their cap and invest system with Quebec's and California's cap and invest system. And so, and we're supporting conversations that are happening among California and Washington and other states that are actively exploring a statewide carbon market system to sort of think about linkage. I think depending on, and I don't want to prejudge the outcome of some of those decisions and the model that has been put forward, but I think all of us are very excited about the opportunity of a multi-state carbon market that brings and strengthens the work that's happening in California, in Washington, and any other states that decide to advance a cap and invest system. So that may be sort of our next opportunity to really pursue an innovative less regional, but more multi-state, for states who decide to opt in, carbon market approach. I think we're going to learn a lot of lessons through that experience. And then I'll just say, I think that the work that a lot of states have done on NEVI funding and implementation of the NEVI program, while it has been, I think, slower than I think many hoped, and has a little bit of an uncertain future, there were a lot of really good conversations and a lot of important work that happened, in particular among sort of the 95 corridor on the East Coast, to figure out sort of how to align procurement for EV charging along that corridor. And so I hope that there's, I think, some regional collaboration that we can build on to take advantage of the foundation that NEVI has helped build. And I will just say that there are some also conversations happening that some of you may be aware of around the possibility of multi-state procurement sort of in the EV or in the EVSE space. And so I think more to come, but I would just pat you all on the back and say RGGI is the best model of regional collaboration that, I think that this country has seen. And hopefully Washington and California are able to build on that. And then hopefully we're able to test out some new solutions and some new programs.
Thanks, Casey. Any last thoughts for Casey before we head over to the cookies, which are on that side of the room? Any last thoughts? So I have one more Menti for you before you go, and I want to capture any piece of hope that you're carrying with you thanks to these conversations. And so if you take out your phones for 1 second, folks, or maybe someone can drop the link in the chat as well for our online participants. Take out your phones. The next question should be up. It should say, what's one word of inspiration from this discussion, right? This is, again, is a word cloud, so one word is great. What's one word of inspiration from what we've just been talking about with Casey and Sarah and Melanie? Just a quick thought on this. And then tech team, as we start to see some results come in, happy to share that on the screen and on the Zoom. Casey, that'll make you happy. Collaboration at the center.
This will make up for the fact that I don't get cookies.
That's right. Fair. All right. Sarah, Melanie, any last words as we finish up this section?
No, just Casey, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation this afternoon. Thanks, David.
All right, folks. We're going to take a 20-minute break. Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Sarah. All right, this is the part of the meeting where we're trying to get a little bit more specific, trying to think creatively about the next 2 years, trying to build on that conversation we just had about how Maine meets the moment, maybe drawing on some inspiration from other states, what Casey put on the table. We're going to do this as conversations at your tables. Again, if you're down to like 1 or 2 people at your tables, definitely join up with another table. We'll spend about a half hour or so in this table conversation, maybe a little less, depending on how we're doing. There's a couple things I want to bring to your attention. First of all, we've got this, this is what you said earlier in the meeting about the kinds of things that we should be focusing on. And then we also had the other word cloud that we just did with Casey about the importance of collaboration and other things. We'll leave this up on the screen for a little bit, and then I'll ask folks to switch to the instructions. On your tables, we just passed out over the break this little instruction sheet. There should be 1 or 2 copies on your tables. This is going to be your set of instructions about how to have this conversation amongst yourselves. It won't be facilitated. You're going to be in charge of running these conversations all by yourselves. All right, and folks online, we'll probably just pause for a little while online. It'll be about 25 minutes or a half hour in our groups here. Okay, so the first thing, the question is, where can we make the most progress, right? That's our question. Where can we make the most progress? Because it's an opportunity to focus. It's an opportunity to recognize the conditions we have and to focus our efforts about where we can really excel in the next 2 years. Sarah Curran also laid out some criteria, if you remember them, that spoke to, where is there room to make progress? Where are there pressing issues? Where are there issues where we can get multiple benefits at the same time? Save people money while also reducing emissions, these kinds of things. Okay, so that's our question. Where can we make the most progress? How can we focus Maine Moat Weight in the second 2 years of implementation? Also on your tables, by the way, are copies of Maine Won't Wait. I don't know if you've seen. We got a couple copies of them, either the full thing or like a little synthesis brief book as well. So what I'd love you to do, by the way, if I see almost everybody did it, but if you don't have a name tag around your neck, I encourage you to put one on yourself. They're at the table, just so you know each other's names at the table. If you didn't introduce yourselves earlier, please do. We want one of you hopefully can take some notes that will make it easier to share back on the backside. Then the first thing I'd love each of you to do is just sit in silence for a minute or two, and each of you just jot down a note to yourselves about the answer to this question. Where can we make the most progress? Right? So the first 2 minutes is individual reflection. Each of you making a note to yourself. Then let's start comparing notes, right? Put an idea on the table. What do you think, right? I put some framing questions here on the instruction sheet, like why is this particular idea ripe for progress right now? Are there related ideas that also could be priority opportunities, right? Play with that for a little bit. But after you've run that down for a little bit, switch gears. Somebody else offer up something else that came up to you when you sat down and had that individual reflection, okay? So if you find yourself really grinding on one issue too much, actually stop and pick another issue, okay? And just let that run for 20 minutes or so and see how it goes. I'll give you a heads up when I'm eager for you to take a look at the notes, eager for you to see if there's some synthesis that's happening at your table. And we'll use the last 3 to 5 minutes at your tables to do a little synthesis and like, hey, did we get this captured well in our notes? Then we'll do a little plenary debrief and talk about it and maybe even do another Menti if you guys will put up with one more Menti. Okay, so that's the plan. Here are the instructions. What else do I want to say? I don't think I want to say anything else. I encourage you to ground this in Maine Won't Wait. That's why we have the copies on the tables. Go ahead and grab it and look at that nice executive summary at the front where it has all of the ideas you all came up with 2 years ago. There's a lot of content there that is still incredibly relevant for the next 2 years. Okay, any quick questions about what I'm asking you to do here in the room at your tables? All clear? Come track me down if you're confused by anything. It is 3:28. Let's go about 25 minutes and see how we do. And so folks online, take a break here for about 25 minutes. And we look forward to circling back and bringing this into plenary then. So dive right into it. I really look forward to some smart, creative thinking that happens right here in this room. I'll be wandering around. Don't forget the individual reflection at the top. Okay, folks, finish up your thought. Let's bring it back into plenary. We're going to share with each other what you all were talking about. All right. If you will humor me, we will do the very last Menti of the day. The very, very last, I promise. So if you can pull out your phones one last time. So, and welcome back folks who are joining us online. This one we'll just reserve for folks in the room, but if you have something you want to say online, that's good too. You have a question. It's just asking you for one of the things you spoke about at the table. What is one particularly promising area for action in the next 2 years? All right, last one, I'll ask you to do this on your phones and then we'll just have a conversation in the room about it. Okay, particularly promising area for the next 2 years. Great. And once you finish typing in, go ahead and look up at the screen. You can see what others are typing in. Seeing a lot on renewable energy, seeing a lot on resilience, storytelling of successes. I love that. Partnerships, local municipal action. Right. Let's focus on actions, less on planning and strategy. Yep, we got the plan. Let's do it. Implementation. Right. Continue with that resilience partnership. Get to 100%. Innovation. Training, contractors and CEOs on new building codes. Love that. Creative funding. Scaling up resilience partnership. Natural resources-based heritage energy solutions. I wonder who said that. Okay, we'll take a few more in, and then we'll see if there's a quick summary, and then let's just have a conversation in the room. It's time to share and learn from each other. Okay, great. Mira, you want to try the spacebar summary? Let's give one, and then we'll just talk a little bit in the room about it. Okay, yeah, absolutely. We saw a bunch about renewable energy. We saw a bunch about resilience and planning. We saw transportation pieces come up. We saw a heavy focus on implementation, time to go out and do this. We saw a lot about partnerships. We saw a lot about engagement, okay? And a little bit about education and outreach, and some about funding. Okay, yeah, for sure, right? These all seem very compelling and very doable, right? This is the work that can get done in the coming years, even in the face of uncertainty and headwinds. All right, time for a conversation in the room to sort of wrap this all up. What else, maybe it's not coming out as clearly in the Menti, but what else happened at your tables that you ended up spending quite a bit of time on that you'd want to share a little bit about in the room? What else do folks want to share? We've got a mic over here and a mic over there, so don't be shy, folks. Let's wrap this up in a good way where we're talking about things that are compelling for each other. What needs to be said that's maybe not coming out as strongly in this Menti exercise? Any hands? Don't be shy. Carl, there's Mike. Can someone bring a call?
Yeah,
and if you want to introduce yourself, Carl?
Sure. Carl Wilson, Commissioner, Department of Marine Resources, member of the council. I wrote down find unlikely partners in red states. We all have our equivalents in red states, and they're facing the same challenges that we are, and are probably addressing them in slightly different ways. And so I just think that there's opportunities there.
I love that. And is there anything that comes to mind, not to put you on the spot, but like when you think about it from a natural resource management standpoint and resilience standpoint, DMR?
Well, I mean, fisheries, for one, are the dubious distinction of having a couple of executive orders that have come out. And so you want to kind of look at those very carefully and seeing if there's opportunities to get to the same ends.
Yeah.
With just a slightly different path, maybe.
Right. I love that. So thinking about your partnerships in ways that actually stretch out across different kinds of states, even beyond the states maybe that are part of the Climate Alliance, right? I love that. Other things that came up in your tables that you want to make sure you share. Yeah, in the back. And don't forget to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gail Zidleski. I'm at the University of Maine Sea Grant Program on the Marine and Coastal Working Group. And one of the things we discussed is more sharing of lessons learned. So we particularly were talking about all of the municipalities and different projects where there are community resilience partnerships, and one town can really learn from the next, and that will cross-cut it across all of the different areas. That would be good. I didn't see that in there. I saw a lot about collaborations and partnerships, but more on lessons learned and how do we keep those moving forward.
Yeah, and we certainly have a lot of experience now, right? Experience through the community partnerships and through other areas. Okay, love that. And like, how does that become operational? How can Sea Grant be helpful in doing that? Like, I think those are really good ideas. What else happened at the tables? What else folks want to share from your tables? I'm sure there's a lot of good ideas out there. What else? Don't be shy. Yeah, right here, bring it over.
Thanks, Hannah. Josh with Natural Resources Council of Maine. I think one thing that I don't see up there and don't see a lot in this space is defense against things that seek to undermine the goals in the Climate Action Plan, like fossil fuel preemption or expansion, and other proposals that we know are going to be counter to our climate goals. So using our collective power to defend against some of those proposals that we know are going to keep coming session after session.
Okay. Great. What else happened to your tables that's worth sharing I bet there's some other things that are worth putting in the space right now. Anything else on people's minds that you like talking about? Yeah, right in the back. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ella. I'm an intern with GoPIF and SRO this summer. We heard land use mentioned in the discussion earlier, and we had quite an extensive conversation about revisiting land use laws and making sure that whether managed at the municipal or potentially the watershed level, that there is enough resources and capacity for both the management, enforcement, and education of land use laws.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah. And I know, not to put anyone on the spot, but I know some folks at this table were talking a little bit about land use decisions and how they impact transportation emissions and things like that. I don't know if, Karina, you want to just mention like what you all spoke about at the table.
Yeah, we were talking a lot about transportation. I think, we had 3 transportation working group members here and lamenting a bit about how hard it is to make progress on that very large sector of our emissions in the state. And we were talking a bit about transit and opportunities and the intersection between how our past land use policies have influenced our current transportation systems today. There's been a lot of work on land use at the state and local level with housing policies and efforts to promote more dense development in village centers. So I think right now that's a good time to try and push that work forward and try and provide resources and support to our communities to do thoughtful development, because that will ultimately make housing more affordable, more resilient, and hopefully have an impact on our transportation emissions.
Thanks, Karina. And that's Karina Grader from SMPDC. Yeah. Great. So land use is a big one, right? And that's important. And I'm curious, I'm going to put a few people on the spot just for fun, but this is a table that has some land use experience here with Samantha Horn from MoCA, Judy East, and others at that table. I'm curious, did you go into the land use space? Did you talk anything about that? Did you talk about some of the things that are going on at MoCA around growth management and other related issues?
There were a few ideas mentioned that related to land use. We didn't go into detail on what's currently happening with growth management rules, subdivision law, TA on housing, and lots of technical assistance. But a couple of things that were mentioned, Judy brought up out of harm's way, which, in the end also ends up being a land use issue as well. And that I think will ultimately affect our infrastructure and transportation systems, because what we're having to repair and rebuild in places where people still want to live makes a big difference at the end of the day. We did talk about some of the things that towns are successful in doing, and then how that could be useful in other places. And so that gets to the comments we heard earlier about sharing lessons across communities. Because it's my favorite topic, I talked about a coordinated, supported system to help communities plan for and implement climate-friendly development, which I think is, very much what you're getting at. So those themes are coming up. And then did you want to mention? Yeah, you were talking about your 3-town project.
I think.
And don't forget to introduce
Amy
yourselves.
Landry from Androscoggin Valley Council of Governments. So Luke Dyer was talking about how the CAG grants, although they've been very successful and they're widely used, have they addressed real needs that would be identified in a vulnerability assessment? So, what's an easy project I can get $75,000 for, or could it have been, we did a vulnerability assessment, we know this is a huge priority, that's what we should be using. So not saying that it wasn't successful, because a lot of our communities wouldn't have been engaged in the program had they have not had that resource in the end. So it's not negative towards the program at all, but how do we continue having communities work on vulnerability assessments? So I was saying in our region, we're trying to have communities work together on it. So the town of Jay, Livermore, and Livermore Falls are currently doing a vulnerability assessment in partnership with each other as neighboring towns. And I think that can really, everything we do, we try to do regionally. So having that rather than each town applying to do it. So that was the example we gave.
I love that. Right. So some regional collaboration across towns to get that foundational work done, like a vulnerability assessment. Then you know how to wisely invest future resources. Love that. Okay. Yeah. Hand right here.
Hi, Amanda Collmore, state representative. I didn't really get a chance to talk with the table because being a state representative never stops, and I was taking phone calls outside. So one of the things that I think we have a great opportunity to do, and I kind of mentioned this to Sarah as well, is we have to stop vilifying people because they have a letter R next to their name. As somebody who's a moderate Republican, and as the people who've been on the committee for a long time know, a very active member of the Maine Climate Council, it's very frustrating and hard for me to get my communities on board when you're saying, we can't do this because of the Republicans. And it's like, no, you have a lot of Republicans working really hard on this. We're just not as loud as the other Republicans who are against it. And how, when we're looking at redoing this and going forward and the potential change, well, we know we have a change of administration coming at the state level, but the potential for the other bodies to change, we're never going to move this forward if we keep doing the us versus them thing. There is a lot of work that needs to be done in my community that can't get done because people are too busy fighting about the policy and who's right. And honestly, I was really upset with the presentation that we had earlier because it was anti-Trump administration instead of what we can do. And talking about the red state, there are red states successfully doing, Texas has done amazing resiliency work, but they're Republicans, so they're evil. And so I'd like us to keep in mind that there are people like me working really hard who have an R next to their name, and we really want to move forward. I've worked a lot with Director Horn on initiatives and working to bring all of the people together under MOCA as the ranking member of housing. And so we need to remember we're not evil. We just might have a different approach to what we think the solution is. So I would love to leave everybody with that as you're moving forward in your groups, because I'm up for re-election, but it doesn't guarantee that I'll be re-elected. And so somebody else might be sitting in my seat, and you shouldn't vilify them for their party.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that thought. And it's so important as we're trying to build broad-based support for important action for Maine. There's a hand here, Judy East.
Thank you, Representative Collmore. I think that was really, really well said. One of the conversations we had about the getting out of harm's way, the idea is a symposium to look at these issues. And the spectrum of, I don't even want to talk about that, that is not on the table, to I'm ready to move, have you got any money for me to get out of this place that's so hazardous, is often perceived on the same spectrum that you're talking about, but it's not. It's what people are dealing with. And we have a lot to learn on the buyout programs in red states, if we will. And so I think that the point is just really well taken, and we need to bring together people, especially on, that is such a hot issue from all sides. I mean, we were literally laughing that it's so contentious. If we have a symposium, we might even have people picketing outside. I don't want to talk about this, but I think we need to talk about it as we're facing.
Right. And there's no need to position it in any kind of partisan way. It's a deep human challenge, right, that we're facing. Yeah. Thanks, Judy. Yeah. Other things that happened at your tables that are important to share, or final thoughts as we're concluding up today? Yeah, Ken. Don't forget to introduce yourselves, please.
Thanks. Ken Colburn, co-chair of the Energy Working Group. And we came up at our table with lots of small technical things that we want to consider going forward. But I have a bigger one to share. And that is along the lines of Maine won't wait in its initial implementation, and then the serendipity we got with the funding to actually execute it had another impact that we don't often recognize, and that's that we've built confidence in the communities through CRP, through the resources available, through the quality of the plan. And now Maine has many communities that would push the state. There's Local Leads the Way that a Climate to Thrive is running, simply because there were so many people calling Johanna Blackman that she couldn't answer all those calls, so she made a monthly call for them all. I think we can perhaps start moving toward enabling communities to take what actions they perceive as necessary to address culverts and saltwater intrusion and energy burdens and so forth, as opposed to simply sending stuff down from on high that they might be interested in. There's enough proactive communities in Maine operating that we can leverage that and use that leadership and share it with other communities. You know, one of the best things about being a professor is when you stop being a teacher and a helper, educator, and move to a mentor. And you watch your students start to fly and eclipse your abilities. We're close to that with a lot of communities. Let's hold them up. Let's use them. Let's share them.
Thanks, Ken. I love that. And it ties into the question, the comment around sharing stories too, right? And we can share those successes around, and communities can learn from each other. All right. Anything else that came up at your tables that are important to mention? Yeah.
Linda Bacon, I'm on the STS and have dealt with the freshwater quality indicator chapter, et cetera. I just am concerned that we're looking, for the most part, for low-hanging fruit, which is very important, but there needs to be a lot of thought put into long-term planning. When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago? So I'd like to see a little more focus on long-term planning.
Okay. Opportunities to think about that 20-year time horizon. All right. Okay. So there's a lot of good ideas out there, and we're capturing them today. We'll make a nice summary of what this conversation has been, and obviously each of you have a role to play in your respective jobs and organizations in driving this forward. To finish up today, I'll ask Sarah to come up. She's got some final slides and comments about next steps, and so let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to spend the afternoon with us today. It is really encouraging, the hard work that we have done together, and also that this group is not afraid to keep doing the hard work. So thank you for that. I want to do just a couple quick slides about next steps. So one, we're about to kick off the annual reporting process. So you will all remember that on December 1st every year, we release an annual report that says, here's how we're doing. We think it's really important to be transparent about tracking progress. We also, it's really great to sort of feature stories and case studies and to the lessons learned point from before. So that will be happening in the coming months, and I know many of you help us with that process in terms of helping us collect data and helping us get good stories. So I just want to say thank you for your help in that, and that's a big lift for our team, but we think it's really important. So that will be a major focus for the coming months. Also, I mentioned this earlier, but the September meeting will focus on funding and finance. So it's going to be a virtual meeting, but we'll have some work that GOPIF is doing with the consultant we're working with around resilience funding and financing. So I hope you'll all join us for that conversation online in September. And then in December, we'll gather again in person, and that'll be the sharing of the annual report, and just a really nice opportunity. I think it's great to see everybody in person. The Zoom is effective and it works, but it's really nice to spend some time together in the same room. I want to thank David for facilitating our conversation today. It's really nice to have you join us. You've been such an important part of this process, and we all really benefit from having you on the team. So thank you. And I want to thank everyone who took the time to spend the afternoon with us today. We know you're all really busy, but it is great to pause and say what's going well and where can we do more. And I'm just really encouraged about the foundation that we've built and the opportunities to continue to push progress forward, even in some pretty challenging circumstances. So thank you all for the work that you do every day to implement Maine Won't Wait. And it's great to see you all. Thank you. That's it.